Chances are, you've probably never heard of this spline jig I made about a year ago. I'd like to think it's one of a kind as it does some interesting things that I haven't seen before. For example, it allows you to cut splines without having to finish the glue up first, which might seem unimportant until you consider that adding splines with your glue up means that you don't need to use clamps. In today's video, I'm going to fix some problems that I found with this old model and show you how you can make this versatile jig with very little materials. Since I've already made this jig in another video, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here in its creation. I will leave a link in the description if you'd like to watch it. I used a piece of pegboard and mapped out a 90-degree cradle. With scrap offcuts, I made a shelf along the 90-degree V I drew, which looked like this when I was done. Using a 3/4 inch piece of plywood that was of equal size, I attached it to the pegboard with a little hot glue. Next, it was as easy as using a 1/4 inch drill bit and drilling through the holes between the scrap offcuts. On the reverse side, I countersunk the holes I drilled with a 1-inch drill bit and added an identical shelf on the plywood piece. And that, in a nutshell, is the entire jig. While the jig has worked flawlessly for the year that I've used it when it comes to cutting accurate splines, I have had a lot of time to analyze it and reassess issues that I've had with it. In this next part, we're going to explore what I think is a better, more advanced spline jig. One thing that really needed to happen the most was ditching the pegboard completely. It warped in time and was difficult to clean. I mean, it is basically cardboard. The bigger problem, though, was the lack of transparency. With the bolts being an obvious concern with the blade, it also made it difficult adjusting the blade to the right height. I switched to plexiglass to solve this problem. After cutting the plexiglass, I left the protective plastic on both sides and added carpet tape to one side. I used my old pegboard as a pattern and marked out 8 holes that would be drilled out. Using a brad point bit, I chucked it in my drill press and locked my quill depth stop so that the point barely exited the plastic. To avoid chip out, I drilled partially through the top, flipped the plexiglass so that it was now on the top, and drilled the rest of the way out. I detached the pegboard, leaving the tape on as best as I could. Because I really wanted a thick, sturdy base, I cut 2 1/2-inch thick pieces of Baltic birch and glued them together. I reapplied my plexiglass to the newly glued boards and used the holes as a pattern, again drilling only enough to leave small holes on the underside. With these new tiny holes, I used a 3/4 inch Forstner bit to drill out the backside. I removed the plastic film and used a thin piece of plexiglass as a shelf, marking out the holes and edges. With the bandsaw, I cut off the edges and chewed out the holes. I had my doubts with plastic epoxy that I'm using here, as you'll probably see screws added later, but that was because I wasn't very patient. This plastic epoxy ended up holding really well. I used my square to make sure things were lined up before clamping it down. I removed the other side of the film when the epoxy had cured. With the plywood side, I used a 1/4-inch strip of walnut as my shelf, first gluing and then attaching with brad nails. I used a pole saw to cut off the edges. And then drilled out the holes again. When it was done, I had a much better window. I can't say the step is absolutely necessary, but you can see how much clearer things are now. The biggest annoyance I had with this jig was the excessively long times it took to remove the handles, especially at the beginning when I took the jig apart to use it, or by adding a third handle in the center of the jig, something I rarely did as it took so long to attach it. To get around this problem, I invented some hinge knobs that quickly slip on and lock themselves as you tighten them to a hollowed out dowel. What makes this such an important addition is the ability to secure things quickly and safely. I'll admit these are one of my more favorite inventions I've come up with. I'm not going to include the full build process of this knob here, but I will have it at the end of this video and in the description. There were a few problems I had to overcome when I made these, and I think it's an interesting and fun video that does well on its own, so I highly recommend giving it a look. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe, ring the bell, and I thank you so much for being a part of my shop. Please leave me a comment below, and remember to keep making things.